Queen Zarella stood on the balcony of her palace, gazing out over the sprawling city of Zenthros Prime. The sky was dark, but the lights of her empire's capital twinkled like stars. She was a force unlike any other in the galaxy, towering over her subjects with wings of glowing light and skin made of crystal. But it wasn't her physical power that made her feared. It was her mind. As the ruler of the Zenthari Empire, she commanded vast fleets, armies, and entire worlds. Many had come to her with gifts and promises, hoping to win her favor. But all had failed. No one was worthy of her, or so she believed. Her beauty, strength, and wisdom were unrivaled. She was more than a queen. She was a legend, and she knew it. However, in the distance, a new threat loomed, a monstrous force known only as the Gorvok Hive. This was no ordinary enemy. The Gorvok Hive was a swarm of biomechanical creatures that devoured entire planets and turned civilizations to dust. No one knew where they came from, but one thing was certain. They were unstoppable. The Hive was rapidly advancing, consuming world after world, and now they had set their sights on the Zenthari Empire. Zarella had sent out fleets to fight them, but her forces were being obliterated. The battle was going terribly, and for the first time in her life, Zarella was beginning to feel fear. She had always been in control, but now the galaxy itself seemed to be slipping out of her grasp. In the war room of her palace, the queen addressed her advisors and generals. They were all troubled, their faces grim. The Empire's greatest commanders stood before her, their hands clenched in frustration. It had become clear that the Zenthari fleets were losing, and nothing seemed to be able to stop the Hive. The galaxy was in danger, and Zarella had no answers. She had never been one to ask for help, but now, with her empire on the brink of destruction, she was forced to consider it. One of her advisors spoke up, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Your Majesty, perhaps it is time we send for the humans." His words hung in the air like a challenge. They are a wild card, unpredictable, but they have faced similar threats before and survived. They may be the key to saving us. Zarella turned to him sharply, her eyes glowing with a mix of surprise and anger. The humans? The lowly species from Earth? She had dismissed them in the past as primitive and insignificant. They had barely even mastered space travel when the Zenthari had already conquered hundreds of worlds. Yet now, with the entire galaxy at risk, she felt a flicker of curiosity. Could they really be the answer? "The humans are chaotic and unruly," she said, coldly. "Their soldiers are undisciplined. Their technology is crude. Why should I place my empire's fate in the hands of a species that is still learning to control its own destiny?" Her general spoke up, his voice soft but filled with respect. "Because, Your Majesty, they have something we don't. They fight for survival. They fight with heart, and sometimes, heart is what wins battles." Zarella paused, considering his words. She had always relied on strength and strategy, but now she found herself questioning her own methods. Maybe, just maybe the humans had something that her empire didn't. A fierce, unbreakable will. Finally, she made her decision. "Send for the humans. I will offer them an alliance. If they can prove themselves worthy, perhaps they will be the ones to save us." But even as she gave the order, a part of her wondered, could a human truly rise to the challenge? Could someone from a primitive, chaotic world stand beside her and help her defeat the Gorvok Hive? It was a question she would soon have to answer. The fate of the galaxy rested on it. The message from Queen Zarella arrived on Earth, and it spread like wildfire across the globe. The galaxy's most powerful ruler, a queen who had turned away countless suitors from all over the universe, was now offering her hand to a human. But this was not a marriage proposal or an invitation to join her empire. She wasn't seeking love. She was asking for help, desperate help. The Gorvok hive, a terrifying swarm of biomechanical creatures, was ravaging planets, and her empire was on the verge of collapse. She was offering one human a chance to prove himself worthy and, in doing so, potentially save the galaxy. The Earth's government scrambled to find the right person, but it was clear that no one could make this decision for humanity. The task was too important. Among the many volunteers, one stood out. Captain Jace Thorne. He wasn't the most decorated officer or the youngest soldier, but he had something else. A reputation for bravery and, more importantly, an unshakable will to never back down in the face of impossible odds. Jace was a retired space marine, someone who had fought in countless battles across the galaxy. He had seen horrors and faced enemies that would make most people tremble. But what the humans didn't know, and what Jace rarely talked about, was that he had lost everything in the wars. His family, his friends, his entire squad. They had all died in the same war that had shaped him into the man he was today. Jace had no time for fame, no time for glory. He was a soldier at heart, and when he saw that the Queen was looking for someone who was willing to face certain death to stop the hive, he knew he was the one for the job. It wasn't about winning or losing for him. It was about giving the galaxy a fighting chance. He made his decision quickly. With no army, no grand fleet behind him, and no promises of rewards, Jace boarded a ship bound for Zenthros Prime. The journey to the heart of the Zenthari Empire was long and filled with uncertainty. His small ship was a far cry from the massive warships he had once commanded, but it was all he had. As he traveled across the stars, he prepared himself for what lay ahead. He was going to meet the Queen, a figure whose reputation struck fear into the hearts of enemies and allies alike. She had refused the greatest minds and warriors in the galaxy. Why would she choose a human? When Jace finally arrived on Zenthros Prime, the enormity of the situation hit him. The Zenthari capital was a city of gleaming towers and floating platforms, a marvel of technology and architecture. As he descended into the palace, he couldn't help but feel like an outsider. The alien species that populated the palace were unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall, majestic beings with glowing skin, shimmering wings, and eyes that seemed to pierce through him. The Zenthari were magnificent, but also cold and intimidating. Jace wasn't sure how he would fit into their world, especially not in front of a queen who had rejected even the greatest of her own kind. Then, Queen Xyrella appeared. She stood, in the throne room, taller than any of her subjects, her wings glowing with ethereal light. She was the very picture of power, her presence overwhelming, her gaze fixed on Jace, assessing him as if he were a mere insect. "You are the human who answers my call?" Her voice was commanding, yet something about it held a note of curiosity. Jace stood tall, meeting her gaze without flinching. Your Majesty. I've come to fight. For the galaxy. For Earth. And for anyone who needs help." He didn't offer her empty words or sweet promises. He was blunt, and that seemed to catch her attention. Xyrella studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You speak as though you have nothing to lose." "I've lost everything," Jace replied quietly. "But I'm not going to let anyone else lose their homes. I'm not going to let anyone else be crushed by the hive. If I die doing it, so be it. But I'm not going down without a fight." His words echoed in the throne room, and for a brief moment, Xyrella's expression softened. She had seen countless warriors bow to her, beg for her favor, and offer all they had. But Jace was different. He didn't care for her power. He didn't ask for anything in return. He was a man with a singular goal: to stop the Gorvok hive. "Very well," Zarella said after a pause, her voice still strong, but now with a hint of something else. "Respect. You will prove your worth, human. If you succeed, the galaxy may have a chance." And so, Jace was thrust into the trials set before him. He would face challenges that would push him to his limits: combat with elite warriors, solving riddles, surviving the harshest tests. But even in the face of these dangers, Jace never faltered. He wasn't there to prove his strength. He was there to prove that humanity's greatest asset wasn't its technology or its weapons. It was its will to survive. And with that, he would either save the galaxy or die trying. The trials set before Captain Jace Thorne were unlike anything he had ever experienced. The Queen's palace was a labyrinth of challenges, each designed to test not only his physical strength but also his mind, his emotions, and his very spirit. The first test was a physical trial, where Jace had to face a series of combatants from different species of the Zenthari Empire. These warriors were tall, strong, and skilled in hand-to-hand combat. But Jace had something they did not: human resilience. He was pushed to his limits, bloodied and bruised. But he never stopped fighting. With each opponent he faced, he adapted, learning their weaknesses and using his wits to overcome them. It wasn't about winning in the traditional sense, it was about survival. He fought not for glory or honor, but because he had a mission: to stop the Gorvok hive. As Jace progressed through the trials, he found that each test grew more difficult, more intense. The next challenge was one of endurance. He was placed in an artificial environment that mimicked the harshest conditions of space: freezing cold, low oxygen, and no food or water. The goal was simple: survive for 72 hours. It was a test of willpower, one that Jace knew he had to pass. The cold bit at his skin, and his body screamed for rest. But he kept moving. He focused on one step at a time, his thoughts fixed on the task ahead. He thought of Earth, of the people who depended on him, of the galaxy that was on the brink of destruction. The environment tried to break him, but it only made him stronger. He endured, his resolve hardening with each passing hour. But the hardest test was the one that came after. It wasn't a battle, nor was it a test of strength. It was a psychological challenge. Jace was placed in a chamber where he had to face his darkest fears. He was forced to relive the deaths of his family, his friends, and his entire squad. The faces of those he had lost haunted him, their voices echoing in his mind, accusing him of failure. The memories were so vivid, so painful, that for a moment Jace thought he might break. But then something inside him shifted. He had already lost so much, but he still had a chance to stop the Gorvok hive. He still had a chance to save lives. The past was behind him, but the future was still in his hands. Jace closed his eyes, focusing on his purpose, and the visions faded. After passing each trial, Jace stood before Queen Zarella, who watched him with an intensity that matched his own. The Zenthari ruler, whose empire was built on strength and power, had been skeptical of him at first. But with every trial, Jace earned her respect. She had seen warriors from across the galaxy fall to these tests, but Jace had faced them head-on, refusing to back down. It wasn't just his physical abilities that impressed her. It was his heart. The Queen had always believed that strength was the key to victory, but now she saw that there was more to winning than raw power. Sometimes, it was the quiet resolve of a single individual that could change the course of a galaxy. The final test was a confrontation with the Gorvok hive. This was the true reason Jace had been brought here. not to prove his worth to the Zenthari, but to show that humanity could be the ones to stop the hive. Xyrella led him to a war room, where a holographic map of the galaxy flickered before them. The Gorvok hive was advancing, its swarms consuming everything in their path. Jace could see the destruction, the devastation, the horror. It was a sight that stirred something deep within him, something that reminded him of why he had volunteered for this mission. "You've passed every trial," Xyrella said, her voice heavy with the weight of the situation. "Now you must face the true enemy. The Gorvok hive will not fall easily. You must find a way to stop them. Tell me, human, what will you do?" Jace looked at the Queen, and for the first time he allowed himself a small smile. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'll figure it out. That's what humans do. We figure it out. And we don't stop until we win." In that moment, Xyrella saw something she had never seen in her own people. Hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from advanced technology or sheer military strength. It was the kind of hope that came from the willingness to fight against all odds, even when the battle seemed impossible. And in Jace Thorn, she realized that humanity had something far more valuable than strength. They had heart. Now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, it would be that heart that would lead the charge against the Gorvok hive. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Captain Jace Thorn had passed the trials set by Queen Xyrella, and now he stood on the edge of a moment that would determine the fate of not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. The Gorvok hive was a terrifying force, an army of biomechanical creatures that consumed everything in their path. They didn't just destroy, they assimilated, turning entire planets into part of their hive mind, erasing any trace of life or individuality. No one, not even the greatest of the galaxy's armies, had been able to stop them. And now, it was up to Jace and his humanity to try where everyone else had failed. The first step in his mission was to infiltrate the hive's stronghold, a massive fortress located on a planet at the heart of their territory. The fortress was surrounded by thousands of the Gorvok's drones, each one a deadly weapon capable of tearing through the strongest defenses. Jace knew that this mission was suicide, but he wasn't going to back down. The mission wasn't just about survival, it was about giving the galaxy a fighting chance. With the help of a few allies from Zenthros Prime, including a brilliant tactician named Lyra, Jace formulated a plan. The plan was risky and would require precision. They had to destroy the central core of the Gorvok hive, the heart that controlled their entire operation. Without it, the Gorvok would fall apart, their hive mind disrupted, and the galaxy would have a chance to rebuild. Jace's team was small, just a handful of soldiers, engineers, and Lyra, the strategist. They knew that if they were discovered, they wouldn't make it far. The group infiltrated the planet under the cover of darkness, using stealth technology to avoid detection. They navigated through the enemy lines, with Jace leading the charge, his eyes focused on the task ahead. Each step brought them closer to the hive, and the tension was palpable. The quiet of the dark planet was only broken by the occasional growl of a Gorvok drone, or the hum of their cloaking devices. As they neared the hive's central core, the gravity of their mission hit them. Jace could feel the weight of every life in the galaxy resting on his shoulders. The stakes were higher than ever, and failure was not an option. Their first real challenge came when they reached the entrance to the hive's fortress. The security system was more advanced than they anticipated, and soon they were ambushed by a group of Gorvok sentinels. The battle was intense. Jace fought with all his strength, his every movement calculated and precise, but the Gorvok were relentless. Their alien weapons tore through the air, and Jace's team fought back with all the firepower they had. The odds seemed impossible, but Jace's human determination shone through. He knew he couldn't defeat the Gorvok with sheer strength alone, so he relied on his wits. He led his team in a series of clever maneuvers, setting traps and using the terrain to their advantage. It was a battle of ingenuity as much as it was one of brute force. When the dust settled, they had made it through, but they were not unscathed. Several of the team members were wounded, and the mission had taken a toll on their morale. But they pressed on, undeterred. They reached the heart of the hive, the central core, where they planted the explosives that would disable the hive's control. As Jace prepared to activate the detonator, he was confronted by a terrifying sight: the Gorvok Queen herself. She was a towering, horrific figure, a hybrid of organic and mechanical parts, her body pulsing with the energy of the hive. Her eyes locked onto Jace, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire universe had gone silent. The Queen spoke, her voice a blend of mechanical rasp and a twisted echo of human speech. "You cannot destroy us," she hissed. "We are the future. You are just a fleeting moment in time. What makes you think you can stop us?" Jace stood tall, not a hint of fear in his eyes. "Because I'm human," he said, his voice steady. "And we never give up." With that, he activated the detonator, and the hive began to collapse. The core exploded, sending shockwaves through the fortress. The Gorvok Queen shrieked, but it was too late. The hive's grip on the galaxy began to loosen, and the mindless drones that had once been a terrifying force turned on each other in chaos. The battle was won, but the cost was high. Many of Jace's team had fallen, and the fortress was crumbling around them. They barely made it out alive, escaping the planet as it began to implode. The galaxy had been saved, but not without sacrifice. As Jace and his surviving team members returned to Zenthros Prime, they were greeted as heroes. Queen Zarella, once skeptical of humanity's strength, now stood in awe of what they had achieved. She had seen firsthand the power of a single human's determination, and she knew that the galaxy had been saved not by technology or power, but by the unyielding spirit of humanity. Jace looked out across the stars, his heart heavy with the loss of his comrades, but filled with pride. They had done it. Humanity had done it. They had faced the impossible and come out victorious, and in the process, they had proven that no matter the odds, the human spirit could never be extinguished. The moment the Gorvok hive fell, the galaxy was plunged into a period of uneasy calm. The once unimaginable threat was gone, but the victory felt hollow. Captain Jace Thorne had led humanity's charge against the hive, but the cost had been high. Many of his team had died in the battle, and countless lives across the galaxy were still recovering from the aftermath. Yet the battle was over, and the terror of the Gorvok had been stopped, at least for now. However, Jace knew the fight was far from finished. The Gorvok hive was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There were still other threats lurking in the shadows of the galaxy, and humanity had to be ready for whatever came next. As humanity's new alliance with the Zenthari Empire grew, so did the weight of their responsibility. Jace found himself at the center of it all, representing humanity in meetings with alien leaders, strategizing for future defenses, and training new recruits. He had become a symbol, not just of humanity's resilience, but of their potential to change the galaxy. His connection with Queen Zarella had also deepened. What started as a partnership born from necessity had turned into a strong bond of respect and trust. The Queen had learned to appreciate the strengths of humanity, particularly their ability to adapt and overcome insurmountable odds. She had seen it in Jace, and in every human who had fought against the Gorvok hive. Yet, despite all the victories, there was an undercurrent of tension. Jace couldn't ignore the questions that weighed on him. The Gorvok may have been defeated, but how many other dark forces were still out there? How many more species or empires would rise up to challenge humanity? He spent sleepless nights, staring out into the stars, wondering what new threats would emerge, and how humanity would stand against them. His doubts were only magnified when a new mysterious signal was detected from the outer rim of the galaxy. The signal was unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. A pattern of electromagnetic waves that defied known scientific explanations. Some believed it was a distress call, others a warning, and a few speculated it was a trap. Whatever it was, it came at the worst possible time. The galaxy was still recovering from the HFY War, and no one was ready for another battle. Jace knew the moment he saw the signal that this wasn't something that could be ignored. He rallied his allies, including Lyra, and a select few from the Zenthari Empire, and they prepared to investigate the source of the signal. It wasn't an easy decision. Heading into uncharted territory meant risking everything once more. They didn't know what they would find, but Jace understood that humanity couldn't afford to shy away from potential threats. The mission was to be a simple reconnaissance. But as they journeyed deeper into the outer rim, things quickly took a turn for the worse. They came upon an ancient, forgotten station. Silent, abandoned, and seemingly dead. As they docked with the station, Jace and his team entered cautiously, weapons at the ready. What they discovered sent chills down their spines. The station wasn't empty. It had been overtaken by a new, alien race, one that was unlike any they had encountered before. These beings were powerful and technologically advanced, but their intentions were unclear. Were they allies, enemies, or something far worse? The team quickly learned that they weren't alone. The alien race, known as the Zelthor, had been dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise again. They had been hidden in the farthest reaches of space, but now they were ready to return to the galaxy. The Zelthor were a terrifying combination of bioengineering and dark science, capable of manipulating energy and matter in ways that defied human understanding. Worse, they had a grudge against humanity. The HFY had once been their allies, but humanity's victory had disrupted the balance of power in the galaxy, making humans a target for the Zelthor's revenge. The Zelthor leader, a being called Vrax, emerged from the shadows, his form shifting and flickering in ways that made Jace question whether the creature was even real. His voice was cold, filled with ancient hatred. "You have stolen from us," Vrax hissed. "The HFY were just the beginning. Now, you will pay for your meddling." The Zelthor were not only technologically superior but also had the ability to bend reality itself, manipulating time and space to their advantage. The battle that ensued was unlike anything Jace had faced before. His team was pushed to the brink, their weapons barely making a dent against the Zelthor's powers. For the first time, Jace felt truly outmatched. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity did what they always did best. They adapted. Jace realized that to defeat the Zelthor, they would need to outsmart them, not just overpower them. Using their own knowledge of the HFY hive's destruction, Jace and his team exploited a weakness in the Zelthor's technology, a flaw in the way they manipulated energy. With Lyra's help, they rigged an explosive device capable of disrupting the Zelthor's systems, forcing them into a vulnerable state. The battle raged on, with Jace fighting for survival and for the future of humanity. He knew that if they failed now, the galaxy would fall into the hands of the Zelthor, and humanity would be nothing more than a memory. In the end, the human ingenuity and spirit won out. The Zelthor were pushed back, their station destroyed, and their plans thwarted, at least for now. But the victory was bittersweet. Jace knew that humanity had once again narrowly escaped extinction, but the threat of the Zelthor remained, and the galaxy was far from safe. This was only the beginning of a new, darker chapter in the galaxy's history. The aftermath of the battle against the Zelthor left humanity with more questions than answers. Captain Jace Thorne, though victorious, was now faced with the daunting task of rebuilding and understanding the full scope of the threat the Zelthor posed. The fight had not only been a test of humanity's military strength, but also of their resolve. Though they had emerged victorious, the price was high, and many were left to wonder what the future held. Humanity was not only dealing with the consequences of the Gorvok Hive War, but now also grappling with the dark possibility that there were even greater forces in the galaxy that they hadn't yet encountered. After the destruction of the Zelthor station, the Council of the Allied Species began to convene to discuss the emerging threat. While the immediate danger had been dealt with, the Zelthor had made it clear that their ambitions weren't over. They had shown an unprecedented level of technology and power, and humanity was not yet prepared for the war that could come. Jace was called upon to speak at the council, to represent humanity's interests. Standing before the leaders of multiple species, he could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. These were beings far more advanced than humans, but they had come to respect humanity's tenacity. Yet, the Zelthor had also made something clear. Their rage was far from over, and they were already looking for new allies. What worried Jace more was the idea that the Zelthor might not be the only threat out there. The galaxy was vast, and there were bound to be other forces hiding in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. The more the Council discussed, the more it became apparent that humanity was going to have to face these challenges alone. The Zenthari Empire, once a powerful ally, was now divided by internal politics and disputes. Their focus shifted toward their own survival, and the same could be said for many of the other species. It was clear that humanity was going to have to stand on its own, with the Zelthor looming over them as a dark reminder of what could happen if they failed. But Jace and his people refused to back down. Humanity's determination had been their strength, and now it would be their greatest weapon. In the days that followed, Jace led a group of scientists and engineers to develop new technologies that could counter the Zelthor's abilities. They couldn't rely on brute force alone. Humanity had to be smarter, more strategic. They worked day and night, creating advanced weaponry, shields, and technologies capable of counteracting the Zelthor's energy manipulation. Alongside this, the human military began training at a feverish pace. The most skilled soldiers were being prepared for the worst, taught to think outside the box and adapt to the changing tides of warfare. They had learned that victory wasn't guaranteed, and they couldn't afford to make mistakes. The culmination of these efforts came when humanity began to test their new weapons on a larger scale. With the Zenthari's limited help, they were able to infiltrate a Zelthor base that was still operational. What they discovered sent a chill down their spines. The Zelthor were not only advancing their technology at an alarming rate, but they were also manipulating the fabric of space itself. They had created rifts, pocket dimensions where time and space twisted in unnatural ways. These rifts were not just a form of travel, but weapons capable of destabilizing entire star systems. The Zelthor had begun to open these rifts in secret, setting the stage for a new war on a scale no one had ever seen before. It became clear to Jace that if humanity was to survive, they would need to act fast. The rifts needed to be sealed, and the Zelthor's dark influence stopped before it spread further. But there was a cost to this mission. As Jace and his team prepared to launch an attack on the Zelthor's central hub, the stakes grew higher. The rifts were becoming more unstable, and the possibility of total destruction loomed. The final battle would be the most intense humanity had ever faced. Jace, Lyra, and the remaining members of their team led the charge against the Zelthor's central station, engaging in the most brutal and chaotic battle yet. As the rifts twisted around them, time seemed to bend, creating a surreal and dangerous battlefield. Humanity's resolve and ingenuity were tested to their limits. In a final, desperate move, Jace initiated a plan that would destroy the rift generators once and for all. It was a risky maneuver, one that required sacrifice. But Jace knew that the galaxy's future depended on this mission. With one final act of defiance, humanity sealed the rifts, destroying the Zelthor's power and ensuring the galaxy would remain intact. The cost, however, was immense. Many lives were lost, and humanity had to come to terms with the weight of the battle they had just fought. Yet through it all, one thing was clear. Humanity had proven its place in the galaxy. Despite overwhelming odds, despite the darkness that threatened to consume everything, humanity had not only survived, but had made its mark. The universe would no longer look at humanity as a weak, insignificant species. It would remember them as a force that stood up to the greatest threats the galaxy had ever known. The war was over, for now. But the message was clear. Humanity would never back down. They would always fight, always adapt, and always rise above.